Tonight, we're looking at something that has set off alarms inside Washington, inside NATO, and across major intelligence services around the world. Because for the first time in months, maybe even years, Russia has issued what officials describe as a direct threat toward U.S. forces. Not a vague speech, not symbolic rhetoric, but a specific warning delivered after a Ukrainian strike Moscow now blames squarely on the United States. And tonight, the reaction inside Washington is serious. Heightened readiness, closed-door briefings, and an urgency that America has not shown in this war for a long time. Good evening, and thank you for being here. What we're watching is an escalation, not on the battlefield, not in the skies above Ukraine, but in the diplomatic and military space between two nuclear powers. After a devastating Ukrainian strike destroyed a major Russian asset, Moscow responded with something U.S. officials privately call a direct and explicit threat against American personnel operating in Europe, the Middle East, and the Black Sea region. This isn't Russia's usual background noise. It isn't the Kremlin's typical bluster. This is something sharper, more deliberate, enough to pull senior U.S. officials into an emergency briefing inside the Situation Room. So what triggered it? Earlier this week, Ukraine carried out one of its most successful long-range operations in months, targeting a high-value Russian military facility deep behind the front lines. The footage was unmistakable. A massive fireball erupting from the center of the structure, secondary explosions ripping through the site, smoke visible for miles. The blast was so powerful that regional seismic stations registered a small tremor. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the strike eliminated high-ranking Russian officers, destroyed critical equipment, and disrupted command operations across the sector. Normally, Russia would follow a predictable script: deny, distract, downplay. But this time, they added something new. They blamed the United States. Russian state media claimed U.S. satellites provided targeting data. Military spokesmen suggested the missiles used in the strike couldn't have been launched without American specialists. And then came the line that set Washington on edge. American forces operating near the conflict could be considered legitimate targets. Those two words, legitimate targets, triggered an immediate reassessment of force protection measures across U.S. bases in Europe and the Black Sea region. Forces in Romania, Poland, Germany, and the Eastern Mediterranean reportedly shifted to heightened vigilance. Surveillance increased, naval assets repositioned, missile defense systems recalibrated, intelligence sharing intensified. Even several U.S. embassies quietly adjusted their security posture. Because Washington understands what Russia was hinting at. When the Kremlin feels cornered, when it shifts blame outward, the risk of miscalculation rises. Now, why did Russia issue this threat now? Because this strike appears to have hit a nerve. Russia cannot tolerate the perception, real or imagined, that the United States played any role in helping Ukraine carry out a deep strategic attack. If Ukraine can hit high-value targets consistently, Russia loses control of the war's momentum. So the Kremlin is trying to shift the narrative and pressure the United States into backing off. According to Western intelligence, the Ukrainian operation likely used a coordinated mix of drones and long-range missiles, possibly Storm Shadow or ATACMS, launched in sequence to overwhelm Russian air defenses. Operations like this require timing and precision. Publicly, Washington denies providing targeting data. Privately, officials say Ukraine has become highly capable on its own. But Russia needs a scapegoat, and it chose the United States. Inside Russia, the reaction has been chaotic. Ultra-nationalist bloggers, who often shape the domestic war narrative, called for Russia to target U.S. drones over the Black Sea, harass American troops in Romania, even launch cyber attacks on NATO networks. One prominent propagandist declared, "If America helps Ukraine kill our officers, Americans must be ready to die too." That clip went viral in Russia and raised concerns inside the U.S. intelligence community because rhetoric like that often reflects internal discussions happening behind closed doors. Tonight, U.S. agencies are monitoring a spike in Russian military communications, especially between Black Sea Fleet Command and units in Syria and the Eastern Mediterranean. One senior official said Russian forces may be preparing unpredictable responses. Another said U.S. aircraft were rerouted after a Russian fighter jet flew unusually close. Washington is taking it seriously, NATO is taking it seriously, and Ukraine is watching closely. Because Ukraine knows exactly what Russia is doing, trying to intimidate the U.S., trying to draw a red line, trying to suggest that even indirect American involvement could be punished militarily. But the U.S. response so far has been firm. No change in policy, no reduction in support, and no acknowledgement of Russia's claims. According to officials familiar with the Situation Room briefing, President Biden made it clear, we will not be threatened out of supporting Ukraine. Still, preparation is underway. Across Europe, U.S. bases have increased patrols. Naval movements have shifted. Intelligence assets are monitoring Russian submarines more closely. Radars in Poland and Romania are tracking missile activity with heightened precision. NATO air policing missions over the Baltic nearly doubled in the last 24 hours. The United States does not believe Russia wants war with NATO. Russia cannot afford it, cannot win it, and could not survive it politically. But threatening U.S. forces, even rhetorically, is something the Kremlin does when it feels exposed or humiliated. And humiliation is exactly what this Ukrainian strike created. Analysts who have seen assessment imagery say the Russian facility was nearly obliterated. A crater the size of a basketball court, smoke-filled hallways where officers had to be evacuated, communications equipment melted in the heat, command disrupted, morale shattered. This wasn't symbolic, it was strategic, and it embarrassed the Kremlin. For Ukraine, the situation is a double-edged sword. The operation was a success, but Russia's attempt to drag the U.S. into the rhetoric creates new risks. Ukraine knows the pattern. When Russia is losing, it blames the U.S. When it is cornered, it blames NATO. When it is humiliated, it issues threats. Tonight, the real story is not just Russia's warning, it's Washington's reaction. The Pentagon has increased surveillance flights. U.S. ships in the Mediterranean have shifted positions. American fighter jets in Europe are on higher readiness. All of this points to the same question. What will Russia do next? Some analysts believe the threat is a bluff. Others think Russia may attempt a provocation, harassing a U.S. drone or shadowing a naval vessel. A smaller but more worried group fears Russia may be preparing something more aggressive. A cyber attack on U.S. infrastructure, GPS interference affecting aircraft, or even a missile test dangerously close to U.S. bases overseas. Washington is preparing for all possibilities. One official summed it up simply, Russia is angry, and angry plus unstable is dangerous. Meanwhile, Putin appeared on Russian television today looking tense and defensive. He praised troops, condemned Western involvement, and accused the U.S. of pushing the world toward conflict. Comments analysts say reflect the Kremlin's need to deflect attention from its own failures. And that brings us to the core truth behind this moment. Russia is making these threats not from strength, but from weakness, from insecurity, from frustration, and from fear that Ukraine's capabilities are becoming harder to contain. Ukraine's strike exposed a vulnerability Russia did not want the world to see. And tonight, Moscow is lashing out the only way it can, with words. But words do not change the facts. Ukraine is advancing. Russia is losing critical assets. The Kremlin is scrambling. U.S. intelligence knows the situation. And Washington is not backing down. Tonight, the world is watching a dangerous moment, one where miscalculation could lead to escalation. But the lines are clear. The United States will protect its forces. NATO will not be intimidated. And Ukraine will continue striking the targets it must to survive. Russia issued a threat tonight, and the United States responded, not with fear, not with retreat, but with readiness. Stay with us.